But listen, I spoke to a lawyer, a very senior lawyer, and who has been my friend for a very long time. And he said to me that if after 4 years in office, President Muhammad does not construct any roads at all, does not improve educational infrastructure, the CD hits 25 CDs to $1 and so on, and these NPP leaders who he described as thieves are locked up in prison, he'll be satisfied. This is a lawyer. And then I spoke to a university lecturer who said to me that the only thing he wants is that the NPP leaders who he claimed looted should be locked up in prison and the keys should be thrown away. This is where we are. I am very deeply worried by this because government has many responsibilities which need to be fulfilled. I mean, if you lock up NPP leaders and the situation with Galamsey persists, you have a serious crisis. Perhaps even worse than the stealing and so on. Okay. But somehow we have worked ourselves into a certain frenzy. We are actually waiting for blood. We want to see blood. You know, we want to see blood. The public is angry. It wants to see people locked up and so on. That's where we are. But you see, my brother, you will remember that I foresaw this. I foresaw this. And I spoke about it 2 years before the election. In fact, I had the privilege of being invited to deliver the Mills Memorial Lectures. And in that lecture, I said, look, the NDC ought to be careful about how it raises public expectation about this fight against corruption. And I made that point very clear. It's important to fight against corruption. It's important to retrieve whatever may have been stolen and so on. But be careful how you pitch. And I made this point, clearly mindful of the fact that it takes more than government to bring people to justice. It takes more than government to bring people to justice. First and foremost, you have a judiciary, which is the final arbiter in this matter. The government will bring its case. Those who have been charged will bring their defense and so on. Ultimately, it's the judiciary which is the final arbiter. At the time that all these noises were being made, from the High Court to the Supreme Court, it was obvious that there had been a certain attempt to pack the courts. So that will have an impact on how you are able to prosecute corruption and so on. It's important to look at that. Okay. Beyond that, given the kind of history that we have all gone through as Ghanaians, we expect that those who are accused of corruption and so on would be allowed to defend themselves to the full. We expect the rule of law to operate. And that's a point that Sapuhini made very strongly. You understand? So if you get this mix, you ought to be careful what promises we make to the electorate. Because, Master, those who can easily be convicted or who are always easily convicted are those who steal one fowl in the village. You understand? There are those who steal a basket of cassava. You understand? There are petty thieves, there are mobile phone snatchers and so on. They can easily be convicted because the system we have built, the system of justice we have built, is class biased. You understand what I'm saying? It's class biased. Now, people who are so very rich, it's not easy to convict them, even when there's overwhelming evidence. Why? Because they can hire the best of lawyers. You understand? If the trial is taking place in the High Court, on every issue they will raise a legal point and go to Supreme Court for interpretation. 30 years we are trying him. And it's not because the Attorney General is lazy. It's not because the Attorney General is not diligent. That is the law. That is the structure we have built. Okay? And in Ghana there are many cases. Apparently, President Kufuor came into office with a determination to do something to those who were managing the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation. And many things were done and so on. By the time he was leaving office after 8 years, that matter had not been resolved. I was part of the Free Chatu campaign. You know, I know what happened and so on. By the time Kufuor was leaving office, his dream about jailing Mr. Tatu Chikata could not be fulfilled. They put him there in prison for a while. He came out. Eventually, he won the case. After how many years? 10 years or so. You understand? So it is not easy. There are many other cases that I can refer to. Look, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo as president, obviously, was interested in the Cocoa Board and what had happened in the Cocoa Board or had not happened in the Cocoa Board. And it appeared that his government was determined to put Dr. Opuni behind bars. 8 years after everything, they couldn't. Okay? There are many other cases that I can cite. And these things happen not because attorney generals are lazy, are complicit, are doing deals and so on. These things happen not because governments have lost the will to fight corruption and so on, but this is the system we have built for ourselves. And it is not easy to dismantle this system. Okay? It's not easy at all to dismantle this system. So my prescription at the time was that, look, you're campaigning. And I said at that lecture that the NDC was going to win the elections. I said clearly, I described President John Dramani Mahama as the incoming president. I was convinced beyond doubt that given the correlation of forces, given what was happening at the time and so on, the NDC was going to win the election massively. And I said so publicly. I said, yes, you ought to raise expectation, you ought to make promises and so on. But raise expectations about people's living standards, about the economy and so on. Yes, promise that you fight corruption, but don't make it your flagship promise and so on. Now, if that had happened, the Mahama administration would not be suffering the way it is suffering today because of the perception that it is not fighting corruption vigorously enough. Because of 17 cedis to $1, we are now down to 10 cedis to $1. Nobody cares about that. Who cares? Look at how inflation has gone down significantly. Who cares? The feeding of students of SHS with rotten food has ended. Who cares? The Big Push project has been launched. Major infrastructural projects. They are dualizing the road all the way from Takoradi to Cape Coast. Who cares? Who cares? Look at all the things that this government is doing. All the focus is on jailing NPP leaders. That's a problem. We have a huge problem. You understand? I'm not a lawyer. But I've listened to testimony from people like Alhaji Inusa Fuseni and so on, prominent lawyers and so on, who said that Dominic Ayini is a fantastic lawyer. I'm sure all of you have heard that. That he's a really, truly fantastic lawyer. You understand? So why are we here? And then in the midst of all this, is also the apparent struggle for turf between the Office of Special Prosecutor and the Attorney General. Yesterday I took my time and read Article 88, clauses 1 to 6 of the Constitution. And it is clear that the establishment of the Office of Special Prosecutor was a useless political gimmick which has not achieved anything. You understand? Under the laws of Ghana, under the Constitution of Ghana, Article 88, 1 to 6, nobody can prosecute any case in court without the fiat of the Attorney General. So you can set up an Office of Special Prosecutor and so on. It has to work under the Attorney General. Okay. Now, what was the problem we're trying to cure at the time? The problem we're trying to cure at the time, when I listened to President Akufo-Addo then very closely, was that, look, because the President appoints the Attorney General, it is likely that prosecutions will be tainted with political whatever, you understand. So all the attempt to establish the Office of Special Prosecutor was to ensure that government was isolated or insulated, from prosecutions as well. Didn't happen. We ended up with a special prosecutor still appointed by the president, the same way the president appoints the Attorney General. We didn't cure any problem. But we've created all kinds of complications which are slowing down the process of investigation and prosecution of so-called criminal acts and so on. That's what we have done. At the time, I understood that the NDC did not vigorously oppose the establishment of the Office of Special Prosecutions because they did not want the public to think that they were standing in the way of the fight against corruption. That's why they all supported it. Because they knew that that act of parliament was inferior to Article 88, 1 to 6. And the lawyers will tell you that there's a hierarchy of laws. Laws enshrined in the Constitution are superior laws to laws passed by Parliament and President and all of that. You understand? Because of the principle of the hierarchy of laws. They knew it. But they kept quiet. They didn't oppose it. You understand? Now clearly, the government then also, played this game. And it's not by accident that the first special prosecutor was Mr. Martin Amidu. It wasn't by accident. You understand? So we've ended up creating the Office of Special Prosecution, and when it smells that there's likely to be an investigation into something or quickly it takes over the investigation. And then the Attorney General does not want to appear to be interfering in the work of the Office of Special Prosecutor, so he stays away. And then there's a statement. Look at what is happening to the allegations against Mr. Foriata and the demand or request for his extradition and so on. That's a problem. It's a problem which we are unable to resolve now. You understand? It's a huge problem. But you see, any politician coming into office ought to know all of this and to take all of this into account in making promises to the population. The NDC did not do that. And I remember when I raised these issues, wow! Safuhini, my own classmate in secondary school called me the following morning. What? How he dealt with me? Now you're a disgrace to our school. You don't want to fight corruption. You are supporting these NPP people and so on. My classmate, one of my closest friends, how he dealt with me that day. But you see, I laughed because he didn't understand the dimensions of what was at stake. Now I'm sure he will think differently. Now, these are the facts. He will think differently. And then, for me, there's an important point to make. You see, Hanan, Room to me. Who else? Dubuahini and so on. Yes, allegations have been made against them. But what has been said against them remains allegations. They are not thieves. Yet, they've not been proven to be thieves. Only the courts can make a determination as to whether the allegations made against them are true or false. And I think that we should have the patience to allow the process to take its full course. At the end of the day, if the courts come up with decisions that we are not happy with, the state has the opportunity to appeal against those decisions all the way to the Supreme Court. And even in the Supreme Court, the state can ask for review. You understand? The final arbiters are the people of Ghana. Check the Constitution. The Constitution itself makes it clear that all prosecutions are carried out in the name of the people of Ghana. So finally, the people of Ghana are the final arbiters. How do the people of Ghana intervene in these matters? We can change governments. The people of Ghana have the power to change governments. Okay? So if you don't fight against corruption as vigorously as the people of Ghana want, they will make sure that you don't get their votes. That's one way of fighting against it. The people of Ghana are vested with the power to change the constitution. The people of Ghana can decide that this is not the constitution we want, and that we want a new constitution in which there is no Supreme Court. The people of Ghana can make that determination. Now, we don't want any Supreme Court at all. That the current structure of the judiciary needs to be changed. The people of Ghana can make that decision. The people of Ghana can make a decision that even the principle of separation of power should not be applied in Ghana. That's a sovereign decision that the people of Ghana can make. So whatever happens, ultimately, the people of Ghana will make the final decision. But it is important to avoid some of the things which happened in our history. I don't want to see what happened after the 1966 overthrow of government, where suspects were arrested and treated like monkeys. Put in cages, driven through the streets of Accra and so on. I don't want to see that happen again in our history. I don't want to see a Kania, a high happen again in our history, and happened under Jerry Rawlings. I don't want to see that happen again in our history. I don't want to see what happened to Mr. Chachu Chikata under President Kufuor happen again in our history. You understand? So we need a new beginning. We need a new beginning which respects the rights of citizens. Even those who have been accused of corruption, their rights need to be respected. Finish.
Thank you very much, Comrade Pratt.